Okay, people. So I'm here with Edward J. Douglas, writer, director, producer. Yeah, I mean, you do a lot of different stuff, Ed. Thank you for, well, we finally got this sorted out. It took a while, which I will admit that was probably more my end, but I appreciate you stopping by. How's everything been going?
Oh, thanks for having me. Yeah, we talked about doing this back last year after Sci-Fi London 2020, and then
Yep, yep.
I was over no 2021, right? And then I was
Yes.
over for 2022, and I didn't get to see you there.
No, I just got man, I got tied up. I was doing this crazy job, which was a lot of crisis management having to handle, and it was just a little hectic. So I wasn't able to make the festival this year. How was it?
It was good. So this was the second festival I was actually able to attend in person. So the last 2 years, I've had a handful of short films doing the festival rounds, and I've been able to go to so few festivals because of COVID. So last year I went to
Mm,
Sci-Fi London, which was the first, which was the first festival I could go to for two short films after a whole season, and yeah, I got to go back this year. So last year was with a sci-fi short called Swiped, and this year was with another sci-fi short called You Run, which was kind of like a spiritual successor to Swiped. Same kind of world, same idea.
See, I wondered if they were in the same universe because the ring.
Yeah, I
There
mean,
was
we didn't make so for context for the folks listening and watching. So this was it's a it's a near future world where platforms like Apple, Android, they've moved their apps from just being on phones to being in their contact lenses. So I mean that's definitely coming. I mean I
mm,
think we're going to see that happening in the next decade or so. These things are already moving into glasses for augmented reality. So the augmented reality is when you can see the graphics through your glasses, through contact lenses, displayed around in the world.
yeah, like
So we
Blade
imagine,
Runner 2041, right?
yeah, we imagined a world where the apps we use today are just evolving into that space. So whereas today we have Apple Watches, we thought, okay, what's next? How do we track your movements, interactions? So we developed a ring design, which was kind of based on an extrapolation of real tech today that can track your hand gestures and can track a bit of your environment, and we imagined using that as your control interface. So yeah, we didn't write them as the same story world, but I'm definitely imagining and envisioning like these similar worlds with the rings and the same kind of contact lenses. Same idea that this isn't a sci-fi future like we always talk about. Like in the Marvel movies, Tony Stark has his blue flickery graphics on the Iron Man heads up. This
Mm.
is exactly what Apple would design in a handful of years, and that's how we really approached it. Like it feels so familiar, less yet slightly just a few steps into the future.
Yeah. So what because I think with well, let's go with Swiped, right? It's this kind of dating world and everything like that.
Mhm.
So was it kind of just that full of just all the fake profiles you come across and all of that? So bringing that to life.
Yeah, so yeah, Swiped. I'll assume anyone watching or listening to this had a chance to watch. It's online, and Kevin, I assume you'll put a link up to that.
Yeah.
It it was so that was written by my writing partner Dan Roy. We were jamming one day. As we're always just talking about different sci-fi ideas, jamming one day on what'll happen when. Well, this is spoiler territory. What'll happen when chatbots and all the other annoyances the modern internet get into augmented reality, and that included like chatbot avatars who you think are real, but their AI is actually really, really dumb. Just like you have a profile picture that pops up on your messenger and tries to trick you into conversation. The profile picture looks like a real person, but as soon as you get a couple lines into the chat, they have nothing. going on. It's like artificial stupidity. Um,
Yeah.
so that's where it came from. So we're jamming on that, chatting about that. And a couple weeks later, he was at a writing retreat and just banged out the script. And that was pretty much exactly what we shot. Ironically, the dating app thing wasn't part of the script at
Oh,
all, which feels totally strange even to me now thinking back because the opening is about her swiping through dating app profiles. Then she gets this man who's like a bit of the man of her dreams who totally disappoints her. When we shot it, she was just swiping through Instagram photos, and this guy interrupted her. Um,
uh,
when we got into the editing, we hit this point where people didn't really connect with the Melody character. They didn't really care about her that much. So we realized, okay, going back to like film school 101, how do we fix that? So we realized we need to give her something that she wants, that she's interested in, and to get the audience to invest in her. So what she loses at the end of the movie is an attempt at romance, or at least a hookup. So what we need to give her at the beginning of the movie is that desire to escape into the idea of romance and hookups. So we added an in. We always knew she was a lawyer, just working at some stuff. So we added a moment of her, then insert shot of her on her doing some legal documents. Which is if you pause and zoom in, it's actually a lawsuit against URun, um, which Dan wrote up a whole bunch of details for, and then so we show the work that she's trying to escape from, contrasting it from what she wants, which is swiping through these dating app profiles, and then the guy interrupts her. So as soon as we did that, it clarified the character so much, and it gave an even more grounding hook to that story, which seems so obvious now when we watch it. Even the name of the original name of the short when we wrote it was called Chatbot, which we knew we'd have to change because it was a spoiler for the turn at the end. But yeah, it's just an example of like these things just evolve as you shoot them, as evolve as you create them. You never know how they'll turn out, and you just kind of have to react to the material and react to how it feels when you're making it. So yeah, I can't imagine how we would have made it, how we even thought we didn't need the dating app aspect when we wrote it and shot it, but we just didn't think of it, even though it's so clear and obvious now.
mm. Well, I mean, I think like you can get people messaging you on like Instagram and
Hmm.
Facebook that you don't know.
I get
So
that all the time. Yeah.
yeah, so I guess there is that, but it's a bit because you then have to go into the separate inbox to kind of then look at it and accept it. So there's more process to
Yeah.
rather than dating, it's more
Yeah,
instantaneous.
I think the Facebook Messenger and Instagram filters are better, that you don't get quite as spammed as much as you used to. But I used to get all sorts of messages from like people with random supermodel looking profile pictures. Actually, I get that on WhatsApp a lot still. So those
Ah.
filters aren't so great. So yeah, that was the inspiration, and then the dating app graphics. When we got that in, we tied that together just with footage we had, and it worked. It just clicked nicely.
Mm, mm. And so, yeah, so with that sort of process, like how long does that kind of take? You know, I mean, having some screenings, having people look at it, and
Hmm.
then thinking about okay, how can we alter this and make it work better? Like,
Yeah, well,
you know,
I don't have the numbers in front of me of how long we were editing it, but Dan did the first cut. That was maybe a week or so on and off. He was poking at it, and then I did a little bit of polish, and then we got in front of some people. So, and then once we saw, okay, there's some pieces here that we want to fill in. There's probably, I don't know, maybe a week and a half, 2 weeks of actual work in that edit. But that was spread over quite a bit of time because there's other
mm,
projects, other work happening. Once we got that locked, then the graphics took some time. So we had a wonderful graphics designer named Jesh Nanthakumar, who's a world class like augmented reality designer who we used to work in video games together, and he was excited about exploring these kind of graphics and using a short film as a test bed for it. So then during post production, COVID hit. So he was delayed. I had other projects going on. It ended up taking total about 10 months to finish the whole short, because of the graphics, a bunch of delays with sound, with um, yeah, with just all the components plus COVID.
Yeah.
So I mean, visual effects wise, there was like maybe 4 or 5 big, maybe let's say 6 or 7 big shots that feel like effects. So the flickering characters, the motion graphics, but then there's another like 15 hidden shots that you don't see. So the actors did a ton of overlapping dialogue because that was their rhythm. They got the best performances that way. So then, yet we did a lot of little split screens to make sure that um, the like the person on the foreground was static when they needed to be static and wasn't talking. Little things like that. So it was a couple
Right.
months total overall.
Okay. And when doing something like this, right, which is set in the future, but not, crazily far in the future, and you're thinking about, okay, how will this look, right? Was there a lot of back and forth on that to be like, oh, let's do it, and be like, it might be a bit too futuristic, let's pare it back a
Yeah.
little, or, you know,
Yeah, well, there's two sides of that. One is the graphics design, both in URun and Chatbot, figuring out what does this future interaction look like? How futuristic is too futuristic? And there's a bit of back and forth because on one hand you wanna make it look like something, say, Apple would do, but also what would Apple do in 7, 10 years? Where a design trend's going that you can anchor into.
mm,
Um, and we're probably a bit off the mark of that, but we'll see. We'll see when we get there. And then there's the stylistic aspects, like the Tinder style app in Swiped is very stylized, and that feels like we're trying to make it feel like a cool modern branded style, and not same with the Friender style Instagram app in URun, trying to make it feel stylized but not like a weird futuristic graphic.
mm,
Yeah, so that was one thing that took some time to find the line. The other one is the world itself, the design of the world. We want to put hyper futuristic elements into the world. So like the Orlando skylines in URun, we want to enhance those. So that's something you see in a lot of movies. 50 years in the future, you watch Westworld and you see the recognizable LA skyline, but there's new buildings. So how much of that do we do? And so that came down to two things. First is budget. So both of these movies were tiny budget films. So we had a lot of we needed to put the money where the story was, and not on and not trying to embellish every piece of the world,
yeah.
just for for sake of resources. The other thing is when I look out the window today, the world doesn't look startlingly different than 10 years ago, 20 years ago.
Mm,
There's a lot of little things change. Like I listened out my window this morning and I was hearing electric cars more than petrol cars. Um, that's a change. Some signage is a little bit different. There's new buildings going up. If you look today to 20 years ago, 30 years ago, cars definitely look very different. There's more like bright LED screens, major centers for advertising. But the incremental change year over year isn't night and day. So we felt like really the way people interact with the world today versus 10 years ago, um, the big differences in the world are how people interact with each other and in the world, not so much
mm,
what the world looks like. Um, the other thing that we knew we wouldn't really be able to tackle is futuristic fashion. That's incredibly hard. Like, what is fashion 10 years ago versus today? A lot of subtle evolutions and change that I am in no way qualified to talk about. What will fashion look like in 10 years from now? No idea. We didn't even want to get into that. And I mean, I love futuristic fashion. When I watch Star Trek Next Generation, those ridiculous, shiny, silky unitards. Oh my god.
yeah.
It's hilarious, wonderful, and absurd. And we were like, nope, we don't want to worry about any of that. 10 years from now, the world is going to look very similar with some embellishments, but what we're focusing on is the new ways people interact with the world and with each other in the world through technology, not what shiny new buildings or like augmented reality billboards will be up everywhere. And like,
Mm.
one of my colleagues said, well, shouldn't the bar in Swiped be covered in like um, augmented advertising or like just like holograms and stuff? Like, well, that's not really what the world or the story is about. And hopefully, like, we see lots of bars today, especially in Canada, less so in the UK where you are, where there's TV screens covering every like corner of the bar, and then you see some bars without any. And I think
Mm.
those will still exist.
Well,
So
yeah, because you always get the throwback places.
mhm,
You know, what I mean, be like, oh, this one's themed like the 1940s, and this one's themed like a classic sports bar, and this one, you know what I mean? So I think there will always be that. So
yeah,
regardless of, you know, what I mean, yeah, there might be the place that is just lit up with augmented, you know, chimney bobs. But
mhm,
then you'll have the one that, yeah, be like, no, this one feels like it's 2010. You know, you can go in and you feel like
yeah.
you're all the
There's
way back then.
Yeah, there's bars that I go into today that look exactly like they did 10 years ago or 20 years ago. So yeah, we had these conversations, and some of it came down to aesthetic choices, and some of it came down to story choices. Same with You Run during the 10K race scene at the end of the first act. We thought about, okay, do we want to put up like augmented reality billboards and advertisements like across the race course, like you see on car races. Race car courses. And ultimately, we realized there's no real space for them. They're going to be distraction. That's not where
Mm.
the story is. It could make the world look shinier, but it's not where the story focuses. And I think there's a lot of sci-fi that tries to cram the world as full of cool stuff as possible, when maybe that effort should be put to making sure the story and the characters are as rich as possible.
Yeah, and as you said, right, I think with that, right, I'd imagine, you know, with the running apps and the events themselves, they'd be putting in some sort of blocker to stop all those ads because it would be distracting to the runners. So
Or, or I imagine with the running apps, they probably would get a lot of sponsorship and plaster a ton of ads everywhere they can, um, within like their ecosystem that they control. There's the amount of advertisements you see on apps and websites these days. I can't imagine we're gonna see less of it in the future.
mm,
And that's one aspect that we didn't really put in. Well, I was gonna say we didn't put in Swiped in You Run, but the whole conceit of You Run starts off with somebody who's just gone through a breakup, and she gets an incredibly targeted ad that even uses her face and her image to show her an aspirational idea of what her future could be, and then gives her a running trainer that's perfectly calibrated to her personality to get her totally hooked, on the right kind of charm, charisma, looks, everything that would get her hooked.
mm.
So it's very much in that world, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, what is it about sci-fi that, you know what I mean, kind of entices you to play in that sandbox, Ed?
Oh man. So I started off as a just watching Star Trek with my dad. Watched a
Okay,
lot.
okay. Before we go any further, Ed, I've got to
Yeah.
ask you because I was having this argument with my girl the other day. What Star Trek is the best Star Trek?
Well, what's everyone can have their own best Star Trek, of course, because everyone's different, and Star Trek speaks differently to different people. My best Star Treks. I grew up with Star Trek: The Next Generation. I watched that, most of it on first run. And that crew that's like my family. And Data was a character that I really related to, an outsider trying to figure out how to connect with people. I grew up as a weird outsider, awkward kid. I had Tourette syndrome. I had struggles with emotions. I was different, and Data was, for good and bad, Data was a role model for me, like to show that an outsider could connect, but also I had a lot of emotional dysregulation issues. So I wished I would be like Data, who could shut off his emotions, um, which wasn't necessarily the healthiest tool, but it helped me when I was young.
Mm.
So that was my first trek. I just finished a rewatch of Deep Space Nine, and that's just utterly phenomenal. The number of incredible episodes, incredible characters, character arcs. For me, that is the peak of Star Trek storytelling so far, both with creating a huge, diverse cast whose worlds and lives you get to know, that just details and stories compound upon each other to have just amazing resonance in the last couple years. And that happened both in one-off episodes as well as big story arc episodes, and they're able to kind of like balance those two. And I'm really appreciating how Strange New Worlds is doing a bit of that. They're taking, I find, a page from both Next Gen and Deep Space Nine really nicely. I mean, the show feels like it should be like a, in a way, and a sly little reboot of the original series. But what it has, the original series was about Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. It was about Kirk and
Yeah.
those two guys. It was about that triangle, right? Um, Strange New Worlds is more like TNG in the sense that you have a crew in each episode. Has a an adventure of the week, but is shifting its focus to let you get to know these different characters in different
Okay.
ways, um, really nicely, while planting all sorts of really nice seeds of character development in the way DS9 did, while that's already paying off. So yeah, it's well done. It's a mix of what worked in TNG and DS9 in some really nice ways. I really I really enjoyed Picard, and I really
I think also
yeah
visit the next generation kind of
yeah
connection there. I
yeah
figured it would be
yeah that
something.
as a nostalgia factor, I really enjoyed Picard. I really appreciate a lot of what Discovery does and tries to do. It's not my favorite show. But what's interesting about Picard and Discovery is those are both single protagonist shows, and
Mm.
they really focus on a single character and then have a supporting cast. Whereas as a Star Trek fan, I'm not quite used to that, so I still feel like, but I want to know about that character. I want to know about that character. But they're single protagonist shows with long story arcs, and most of the rest of Trek has been ensemble shows, um, or in the original series, kind of a like that. They had that little trifecta of characters.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, there's my long rambly answer. There's no best Trek. Everyone can love Trek for what it brings to them. Certain Treks will speak to people in ways they would never speak to me because of who they are and where they are at in their lives and how that show speaks to them. So
Yeah, I would say that I was probably Deep Space Nine,
hmm,
but Deep Space Nine from, I think it's maybe season 3 or 4, where Cisco shaves his head and Wolf comes into it.
yeah, I think
I
the
found
head shaving was season 3, and Worf shows up in season 4. That sounds
right.
right.
Okay, because yeah, before that, Cisco just seemed a bit too passive,
Hmm.
and it like he didn't. The character wasn't fully fleshed out. But
Yeah,
then it became like it seemed that they found their stride with him. That he was like,
yeah,
now he was this fully fleshed out person with his views and everything like that.
yeah.
And so I enjoy. I kind of feel as well that Deep Space Nine maybe benefited from Babylon 5 being around, because
I've
they're
heard
both
that.
set on the
Yeah,
space station. So
yeah.
it's kind of like, they'd be like, oh, what, everyone's liking that. Let's try and up our game a little bit and
I've
see
never
what we.
actually watched Babylon. I've tried to watch the first episode and I really struggled with it. And I want to go back and try again, but it's a series that I missed. Yes, Cisco. Yeah, that's a show. Yeah, DS9 character did evolve and change quite a bit over the years. You had
Hmm,
Dr. Bashir, who was really kind of annoying and terrible in the first year or two, and he really came into his own beautifully
yeah.
later on. But on this rewatch, what I found really interesting was I loved Odo as a character. When I was a kid, I loved him, just this this gruff, mysterious outsider. But rewatching, I've realized in the last few seasons, once he learns who he is, where he's from, he develops a relationship with Kira, which I love the relationship. But overall, once his mystery was unraveled and I knew who he was, and his struggle was about how does he balance between his people and his sense of duty and honor, I wasn't interested in the character nearly as much. In the last couple
Yeah.
seasons, I don't care about Odo the way I did in the first few seasons. I loved this character who was like hell bent on honor, not honor, but like his duty and justice, his all of his witty scenes with Quark. And he was this investigator. I loved like spy investigator
Mm.
noir shows, and he was like the avatar of that kind of stuff. And in the later seasons, he just wasn't that quite that anymore. So it's interesting to see how my through different eyes, my appreciation for different characters and stories change.
Yeah, I kind of feel that character is a bit similar to Niles on Frasier, right? While he's chasing Daphne, he's interesting. And then
Mm,
once they get together, it's like, I don't care about them.
that's a really great way to look at it. The chase is interesting. The yeah, once because I love the episodes when Odo and Kira got together, and it was yeah, it was wonderful to see that pairing and that matchup, and I really enjoyed Kira in the relationship. But
Mm.
yeah, Odo wasn't as interesting once that's happened. Kira's another wonderful character that I appreciate way more now as an adult than I did as a kid. Somebody who's trying to find her, kind of like Captain Kirk in Undiscovered Country, a character whose war is over and she's trying to find purpose in a new, different world. And somebody going from a terrorist to part of the establishment. It's really
Mm.
fascinating stories, and I haven't seen much of that kind of story on TV at all. So, I heard somebody say online, or is somewhere online that I saw recently, is Star Trek Next Generation is an example of an aspirational utopia in the future. DS9 is a show that's about the hard work it takes to create and maintain that utopia.
Hmm.
Interesting thoughts.
Yeah. That is kind of true when you think about it.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. My only kind of real gripes with Deep Space Nine was the length of the stories, right? Because I think with Babylon 5, right, you had a season dealing with the build up to the war, a season with the occupation and the war. Where in Deep Space Nine, when the Romulans took over, it was like I think two, maybe three episodes, and it was just like, I wanted more. I mean, like, you know what I mean? I wanted more of that. It didn't feel as impactful
Hmm.
being so short, but even being what it was still probably some of the longest stories of Star Trek.
Yeah,
So they
yeah,
were trying something for sure, but it was just like, I just want a bit more.
yeah. Until the Discovery and Picard era came about. I suppose Enterprise did a bit of that as well. But yeah, there I think DS9 was still really finding what can be done in a balance of adventure of the week, balanced with long story arcs, and yeah, it was wonderful exploration. And
Mm.
yeah,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
Ron Moore was one of the many writers part of that, and his work kind of like riffing on that he did in Battlestar, and now with for all mankind. I love his writing. I love his work. Um,
Mm. Yeah, I think he's got a new I think he's working on a Disney series.
yeah.
Think I think that's what I read.
Mm.
I don't know, it's hard to keep track.
There's a lot of shows out there, but yeah, I'm excited to watch the third season of For All Mankind that started a few weeks back. So it's coming up on my watch list.
Uh-huh. So what now this is the thing, right? Which yeah, I find interesting because writing, like, I've tried I've played around with some stand-up, right? And it's like it's difficult watching stand-up specials because you're like, I don't want to steal any premises, right? Because when late at night, when you're thinking of ideas and you're just like, oh, that's so good. Oh, that's a great concept. And then you suddenly think and be like, hold on, didn't Segura say something similar? Oh, fuck. I can't, no, I can't do that. So it's just like, you know, what I mean? Try not to watch too much so you're not being too overly, so you're not taking premises and things like that. But where you enjoy, you know, sci-fi, like, how do you ensure that, you know, what you're creating isn't too similar to stuff that you may have consumed down
That's
the
a
line?
that's a really great question. I mean, I watch a lot of different genres. I watch sci-fi, I watch a lot of drama. Well, let me pull out my list of the shows I'm working on at the moment, or I'm watching at the moment. Um,
Okay.
well,
And one thing, did you ever watch Foundation on
yes,
Apple?
yes, I did.
Oh, that was, I
So,
really enjoyed
I mean, right
Foundation.
right now I'm watching a lot of genre. I recently finished Only Murderers in the Building, which is like a comedy mystery
Okay.
show.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
watching Dope Sick, which is about
Oxycontins, right?
the OxyContin. Watching The Boys season 3, watching Miss Marvel. I'm doing a rewatch of Voyager. I'm watching the last season of Better Call Saul. I've tried to start watching Squid Game, and I've struggled with it. I'm rewatching Sense8, and I just finished Kenobi. So quite a range of things.
Hmm.
Um, and I've recently tried to start watching Schitt's Creek, but I haven't gotten too far into that. But a lot of the shows I watch with my writing partner Dan Roy. He's in Bulgaria, I'm in Canada, and we sync up online some mornings and watch. So we just finished watching Kenobi together. We're watching Strange New Worlds together, and we've watched some bad things together too, good things and bad things. But what I love about it is we can talk about it, we can share what works and what doesn't, and it often becomes a film school for us because we can stop and say, "I love that idea. Why didn't that work?" So, for
Mm.
example, on the show Foundation, I loved the first episode so much. It was an incredible, not just an incredible retelling of that first novella from the first Foundation book. It enhanced it and enhanced the point of view character really beautifully. It added some elements that were brilliant, but afterwards, I didn't like the rest of the season. I wasn't interested in it. It didn't have the spark and the
Uh,
kind of the what it didn't have what I loved about that first Foundation book. So Dan and I get to talk about all these things, not just the ideas, but the craft, how things work,
mm,
how things are structured, what works, what doesn't, what tricks and tools we can say. Oh, I loved how they did that. Not what they did, but the tools or techniques they did. So I think
yeah.
when I'm watching other media, I'm not I'm not thinking about what ideas to steal. I'm thinking about what techniques work, what how things are done, how like this. Here's a great scene about where exposition is given in beautiful, understated, subtle ways that are rooted in character action. Like those are the things that I say they did that so well.
Mm,
I want to remember that and do that some other time. Like how do I use that kind of technique? Because when I'm trying to think of stories, yeah, you can get into the whole like, has someone else done this? Has someone else done that? Over the years, I've tried really hard to figure out what stories can only I tell, what's authentic to me,
yeah.
what's authentic to my world and my experience, or at least what filters can I use to bring that authenticity to it, and and um, and I think it's really easy for people of of my background, my generation, to have grown up watching so much media with characters that look like me doing heroic things. It's really easy to just riff on what we've seen before and just keep copying and churning out similar things. So I'm
Mm,
really trying to avoid that and dig into myself. So, for example, I'm trying to move away from short films now. It's time for features. But if I do
uh,
one last short film, it's about my childhood. It's about struggling with my emotional dysregulation as somebody with Tourette's. It's struggling on about how I wanted to connect with people and make friends and both embrace those parts of me, but also run and hide. It's about the kind of masks that I would wear as a kid that really I've spent a lot of my adult life wearing, and now trying to work on that. in my own personal development, like really try to find stories that are authentic to me, and then I'm not so much at risk of copying other media out there if no one else is telling that that story. And then also trying to be inspired by stories around me. So You Run, for example, was inspired by partially inspired by people that I know who've developed challenging relationships with, where a healthy outlet like running can become life consuming, almost compulsive,
Mm.
or what happens when healthy things can take over your life in unhealthy ways. Um, so I try to find like rooted, authentic anchors into stories, and often like Dan and I will come up with story seeds of really cool ideas. But if we can't find like an authentic character or something authentic to really root it into, we might give it a miss because it doesn't really speak to us on a deeper level other than a cool gimmick.
Yeah.
So I don't know if there's any perfect way. There's so many brilliant storytellers out there. Whatever I do, I'm sure someone else will have a riff on it, or vice versa. We just kind of have to let that go and do your best. I mean, how many times have we seen two movies in a year come out that almost have the same, like they practically have the same trailer?
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
and I mean, I think less so now, but I remember the '90s, early 2000s, two animated movies about bugs, two
Mhm.
disaster movies about asteroids.
Yeah. There was
Being,
2 Snow White films.
yep,
And
yeah,
wasn't there 2 Robin Hood ones came out around the same time? Or were going to, and then maybe one got pushed back?
yeah. I don't remember, but yeah. So you just have to let go and do your best. And I think an important thing is to know your biases, know where your biases are coming from. If you think something is really cool, say, hey, is it cool because it's something authentic of you that you care about, or is it because you've seen something like that? I think it's easy to chase trends,
Yes.
and yeah, I think you got to be aiming. You can't be chasing trends because these projects take so damn long that by the time you get it out, the trend will be 3 years old or 3 years out
Mm.
of date.
Yeah, it's funny, I was listening to, Rogan the other day, and Mike Judge,
Yeah,
the
Mike
Beavis and
said,
Butthead dude.
yeah.
Yes, he was on, and he's talking about Idiocracy and how when they started to make it, Uggs weren't out. And so the costume design was like, oh, we should have people wear these shoes. They're ugly. They're not going to pick, get. No one's going to be doing them. But it took, I think, he said 2 years for the film from that point because of some stuff. Then Uggs were all over the place.
Hmm.
So it's just like, what I mean, you try and do something before something might possibly blow, or yeah, and it's difficult, right?
Yeah.
Because you don't know how things are going to develop in that respect.
Yeah, I think you just have to be authentic to what moves you and hope that the audiences resonate. Personally, I feel that. I mean, I think about a filmmaker like Steven Spielberg, whose films resonate with so many people, and he practically developed the modern blockbuster. He and Lucas, but I don't feel like he did that in a calculated way. I don't
Mm,
think he looked at a whole bunch of data and said, "This is the kind of movie I need to make to hit a huge audience." I think he made what felt right and interesting to him. I think he had some themes. Generally, there's a lot of themes in his movies around fatherhood, sons and fathers, especially, that he was drawn to, and that happens to resonate with a lot of people. It wasn't calculated. He just got really lucky that what he was interested in resonated with a lot of people and was able to make that. He, of course, did it with incredible craft. Um, but I think when people chase what feels right and authentic to them, I feel like if they have the opportunity to make it and get through the struggle of getting it out, the audience, if it's there for your vision, will be there. It's a struggle to not chase what you think will be resonant with audiences. And I think some people do find success calculating what they think will resonate with audiences and aiming for that. But yeah, it's a tricky thing, because what if, I'm trying to think now, what if I want to make something that resonates with me but with nobody else in the world? Is it worth
Mm.
making? How do you do that? What if your tastes and style don't resonate with anybody? And that probably happens. Um, yeah. So,
I
yeah.
think the interesting thing about you making a short kind of based on your childhood is that like I've had conversations and heard conversations with people who had Tourette's, and the mechanisms that they use to get through it, and it's always different, right? So it's just like what you create isn't necessarily going to be the same as what someone else would
Yeah.
have done and so that's what kind of makes it interesting and compelling, because you get to see how someone has navigated these moments in life,
Mm.
and it's just like, would I have done that? Like,
Yeah.
oh, that's really, and you know
All,
what I mean?
all I can do is share my experience. I can't speak for every person with Tourette's, because every person's experiences are a bit different. On this project, if we make it, I have a producer partner, who's another wonderful filmmaker who also has Tourette's, and our experiences are quite different growing up with it, but there's a lot of similarities. And he and I have been able to talk and jam on the commonalities of experiences and think about ways of expressing them on film, so we can tell the audience what it's like to experience it, not just watch somebody with it.
Yeah.
But I can't hope to make a film that's authentic to his experience living with it, but hopefully you can relate to it. All I can
Mm.
do is share my experience, because I think for me, the more I try to water it down to express everyone's experience, the less interesting the film would be. I think there has been for years this push in movies to make the idea of the relatable character, the everyman,
Yeah.
the general, like, this human that doesn't exist, that represents a bit of everybody, but that doesn't exist. It forces you to figure out culturally who you want to say normal is. Um,
Mm.
who is a normal person? Well, that's a pretty dumb concept to even start with. And what I love about movies, like the last 5 or 6 years, more and more mainstream, is films that find relatability through incredible specificity of experience. A character whose life and world and viewpoint might be so different than mine, but I can relate to them because of the basic shared humanity of us. I don't relate to them because they look like me or they act like me or sound like me. I relate to them because I can connect with the shared humanity and then connect to their life and experience that is so different than mine. And that's something that I love about modern film, of this push for so much more diversity in storytellers, in who's driving and telling stories, because it's just shown that we don't need this idea of the everyman, um, to have people relate to a character. It's at least to me, it's proven that was a fallacy that wasn't necessary for so long.
Mm. Now, I think the interesting thing about that is, when you look at you run, right?
Mhm.
Now, when you're creating that, was it always, Jodie? Like, because essentially it could be a man, it could be a woman. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't really matter to some extent. But
Yeah.
when you're creating it, you're thinking of these ideas, does it always, you know, does the clarity of the character jump out straight away?
Mm.
Or is it like, all right, if someone was in this situation, all right, it'd be great, and then we do this and this, and then you think and be like, who would this someone be? And then you go, oh, let's make it a woman, or let's make it a man, or let's, you know
Mm.
what I mean? Like, what is that?
Yeah. So I wish I could say that there's like grand calculations behind all of it, but in You Run, um, the Jodie character wasn't. I first envisioned her based a little bit on a runner friend of mine, and because I was picturing this friend, Jodie was a woman in my mind immediately. It wasn't any like higher thinking or calculating. So because of that, having uh, having Trent, having the trainer be a man, fit fit together. We didn't make a choice to make it a heteronormative kind of connection, but that's what we. I'd say that our bias led us to default to that, and we never had a conversation about that. In fact, about
Mm.
what the genders, the gender would it be gender opposites? Um, for Trent, I had a very clear idea in my mind of who that character would be, as far as attitude, as far as character, his vibe, and it was based on like basically a kind of Chris Hemsworth and Thor kind of thing. Confident, a little bit cheeky, a little bit chill, um, a bit of that kind of Chris Hemsworth um, surfer thing going on. And the actor we cast, Philip Mullings Jr., just he was the only guy who brought that kind of feel and attitude, and he just knocked his audition out of the park. Um, Jodie, I did not have a clear vision of the personality of that character. In fact, one of the things that I would love to, if I were to go back, is to kind of reinforce more who she is as a human outside of her running world, because she was, in a lot of ways, unfortunately, the character as written was a bit of a pawn to the story, not a character who was driving her story. So any personality and character of Jodie really came through the performance from Mayumi Roller, not through any brilliance in writing or directing. Um, so yeah, I'd say Jodie was less calculated. Trent was more calculated. Mayumi, who played Jodie, was an athlete. She was an Olympic athlete in London 2012.
Okay.
Um, she was, yeah, she understood the world and could bring this arc of like going from newbie to incredibly intense runner by the end, all through attitude and micro body language. And she did an incredible job. We put her in baggier clothing at the start, and then tighter and a little bit more clothing that exposed her physique more in the end to show that trajectory. So even though she didn't. I mean, we shot the whole thing over the course of a week. So even though she couldn't go through a big transformation,
Mm.
we created a bit of the illusion of it. And I think it works decently. It wasn't like Castaway with Tom Hanks starving himself for 3 months between shooting blocks. Um, but yeah, and I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I think with the character of Brenda, so Jodie's friend, um, I think both the writer and I initially had a little bit more of a cliched idea of who that character could be, but the casting led us away from there, which is for the best. So yeah, it's in a way we didn't calculate much, and I think we're really fortunate with the people were who came to casting and showed us the best version of the character.
Mm, mm. And do you think that's kind of maybe the best way to do it? Because then you're not confined and you're always kind of pick the best performance rather than no, it has to be this. You know what I mean?
Whenever I think there always has to be somewhere along the lines a check of kind of internal biases to make sure you're not doing something kind of cliche because you're kind of ignorant of certain biases. So there has to be some space there to be able to sit back and look, or have other people, trusted people on your team check your biases. But um, but being open in casting to what comes, I think, is really important. Whenever I'm casting for a show, it's actually a really anxious process for me because until casting, a movie can be anything. I have my script and I can imagine anything in the world.
Yeah.
And then as soon as casting starts, I have to go from this blue sky, anything is possible, to one thing is possible, this one face, this one person. So if I don't pick somebody who excites me, or if we don't have somebody available who fits my vision, it can be really emotionally difficult. Um, so when I'm casting, I find for each character, one of three things happens. So somebody walks into the room and they're either a version of what I envision. They're decent, they're pretty good, they can do it, and they're a version of what was in my head. Sometimes you'll have nobody comes in anywhere close to what was in my head, so you have to kind of pick from a whole bunch of people who don't quite fit, and maybe you have to reimagine who that character is to who's available. And I'm talking about on my budgets, even on big budget video games. Sometimes that's been the case because of who we have access to based on unions or budgets. And then the third thing, and this is the amazing part in casting, and this happened in New Run for sure, is somebody walks in who changes your mind about who the character is, kind of teaches you something new about the character that maybe you didn't see or you didn't realize, now, and gives you new opportunities and defines the character for you. And
Mm.
on New Run, that happened in a way. I mean, Philip Mullings Jr. clearly looks nothing like Chris Hemsworth, but he brought something new and different that nobody else had. He brought magic in his charisma, his attitude, that where he could feel effortlessly charming, while bring a little bit of that edge and calculation to it. And yeah, you just have to be open to people changing your minds about characters, because you're bringing on collaborators, you're bringing on co-workers whose job it is to create a character, not just to do exactly what you say. So you have to allow them space to dig as deep as they can go into the character and show you what they come back with. I think that goes for anyone on the crew. As a director, if I'm making everyone's choices for them, people's work can only be as good as my best effort divided by all those people. If I point them in the right direction, give them as much space and as they can take up, provided that they understand the vision and the direction,
Yeah.
then they can bring so much more than just like somebody dictating from on high what to do in the job.
Uh-huh. Okay. And with the end of You Run, was that always the end? Like, or and did you kind of figure, let's leave it a little
Ambiguous.
yes,
Yeah.
that one.
Ambidextrous, amphibious. That was the ending as scripted. Yeah.
Because yeah, I'm watching him, just like, oh, what's she gonna do? Right? Because up to that point, it feels like she's been on this journey, this realization of what she actually needs, and then it's just this thing thrown out there, and it's just like, and you see that contemplation, and it's just like, oh shit, how's she gonna go here?
I mean, every time I try to delete my Instagram app and say I need to just get rid of this, it's too addictive, somehow it ends up back on my phone. How does that happen? I don't know. I don't know how that happens.
Oh man, yeah, yeah, that was, because I think it's that whole thing of, it was that question. You'd be like, did you really do it without me?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Because even when you break it down and you go, oh no, that last period, she went out on her own, but to get to that point,
Mm-hmm.
so
Like
it's just like,
yeah, what
oh,
did she want at the very beginning of the movie? I think did she want a little distraction? Did she, yeah. What did she get at the end versus what did she get at the beginning? And then you can start unraveling, if you want to be all like film school about it, who was the protagonist of the movie? Who had the clear goal and who won the movie in the end?
mm. Yeah, no, I very much enjoyed it. Yeah.
Mhm.
So you've made all of these short films
Yeah.
now, and so now you're like, oh yeah, I feel I'm gonna do a feature. So what is it about now? Like how is it, now you've come to this thought of, okay, it's time to go bigger.
Mhm. So my career path started in film and TV. Started in both film shooting and post production in Vancouver, Canada, um, on short films, TV service work, low budget features, a huge range of things. And then I got caught up in the video game business for years. I say caught up. I was very lucky to work on some wonderful games, telling stories in games, directing cinematics, directing narrative, and my heart was always in the film world. I love games. I love the interactive, and I got to work on big cool franchises like Need for
Mm,
Speed, Mass Effect, Little Big Planet, some Tom Clancy stuff, some a handful of other things. So my goal was to see, can I translate that experience and those career heights into the film world. So shortly before COVID, I said, okay, I'm going to make some short films to see if I still know how to make movies. Um, what what's changed in the business? What's the same? What's different? What do I need to learn? Where do I need to grow? Where are my blind spots? And I made I directed three short films. I produced another one with one of my creative partners, Ray Ragavan. And so the goal of these shorts were to basically practice and then um, apply those learnings to bigger projects. I mean, shorts are wonderful. Nobody makes money on shorts. Everyone
yeah.
loses money on shorts. And I learned so much. Um, Secondary goals, sure, if I win some awards, that's great. I mean, you always hear stories of somebody who does a short film and it gets turned into a feature and now they're directing Black Panther. But
Yeah.
that is an utter anomaly, and it's not a career plan. It's wonderful if it happens, but it's not a plan. Um,
Mm,
but building up a portfolio is important. Having a live action portfolio was critical. I coming out of games, I could get meetings with folks about live action work, directing, MOW stuff, commercial stuff, but people would look at my demo reel and say, I don't understand. Who are these computer people on your demo reel? Are you programming these things? Like, no, I'm on set. I'm directing. I'm running a writer's room. I'm telling
mm.
stories. This is mocap. These are actors. We're telling stories with cameras and performances. But sometimes in the film world, the language doesn't translate over. So building up a live action portfolio was also a critical piece for me. And Swiped You Run, as well as a previous short, Dearly Beloved, has helped immensely with all of that. The other thing that's happened is I'm doing a lot of visual effects work these days. I was always in the CG visual effects world, but I not only did I do visual effects on Swiped and You Run, I've been doing them on a handful of other short films, and it's translated to most of my work over the last couple of years. Or a lot of my revenue work. So while I'm doing writing, while I'm building these shorts, the revenue work is coming out of learnings from short films, which is visual effects. I'm doing some on a handful of TV shows right now, some of which hopefully will be out later this year. Other short films. Did a piece for Honda last year, which was actually um, very similar to the You Run and Swiped world, looking at what augmented reality in cars in the future will look like.
Uh,
So even though I haven't taken the shorts into the feature world yet, I've been able to keep building my career off of these short films and
mm.
pay the bills, which is a wonderful privilege that I know not everyone gets to do.
I mean yeah, that's interesting. Because it's just like, yeah, you've been able to, come in, like create that reel to get you to the place where you can, then do that next step, but then also use these new skills to, make money on top of that.
Yeah,
And that's pretty incredible.
yeah. If I get to spend half the year doing visual effects or other client work, and the other half of the year writing, that's a pretty great place to be because, like I said, I want to do features. There's two avenues of features. Well, there's the director for hire avenue, which is one thing to pursue, and then there's my own projects, which is another thing to pursue. Both of those are definitely a path forward. For my own projects, I got to write the darn things, and it's work. It's time. These things can take a long time to develop. You don't just sit down for a week and bang out a feature. Some people do. I don't.
Yeah, that's always interesting. Like talking to people about, how long it takes them to write something. And sometimes you be like, oh, so how long did it take to write this film? You're like, oh yeah, just like, about a week. And you're just like, yo, what? And then someone else would be like, oh, I worked on it for about 3-4 months. And so it's always interesting to see that process with people.
Yeah, it's even in like I was saying, my writing partner and I watch a lot of things, and we don't dissect the scripts, but we really talk about what resonates and what works. And we're watching the last season of Doctor Who, and watching some of these scripts and these stories, and thinking, oh, there's ideas here. The ideas aren't bad, but the writing and the construction feels so sloppy. It feels like a first draft script, and it needed more cook time. It needed more drafts. You needed to be able to stand back and say, okay, I like the idea. Let's actually make this work now. And then last month I was reading an interview with the showrunner, Chris Chibnall, for the latest season of Who. And he was saying it was literally that. Literally, because of time pressure, time crunch, COVID, and many other things, some of the scripts that went to camera were literally a first draft. Literally a first draft. And I know what a first draft looks like. I write them, and they're terrible. But that's the step you take to get to something great. You get something down. You do a vomit script. You get your ideas on paper. You get them out of your head. Then you can sit back and say, what works, what doesn't, what do I want to keep, what needs to change, and you evolve it and you evolve it and you evolve it. And then I take it to friends who read the script and say, okay, read this. Let me know what you think. And I'll ask them 3 questions. I ask them, where are you excited? Where are you bored? And where are you confused? And those 3 questions usually tell me everything I need to know about what's working in the script or not. And anyone, they don't have to be a writer. They don't have to be an expert. They can tell me that because I want to know how you react to it as an audience member. Sometimes I'll give scripts to writer friends, and instead of telling me how they react emotionally to it, they'll tell me 20 things to change. And that, what do I do with that? Then I got to figure out, what problem are you solving? What problems do you see? And is that actually are you trying to solve a problem based on my script or based on what you think the script should be? And then I have to reverse engineer their solution to figure out what problems they're solving. And sometimes it's more challenging getting feedback from writers than non-writers because people try to solve all the problems in your script rather than give you an emotional reaction to what's working or not. But getting a whole bunch of different views is so essential because your readers are like your first audience. You just got to go over and over and over and over again until you can't anymore. So I think that's the only way to get to quality. And when I look at, like I was saying earlier about Star Trek Discovery, some wonderful ideas, but it felt like each script could have used 1 or 2 more drafts, just to really refine some of the execution of the ideas. And I think in a way, Strange New Worlds has an easier problem to solve because they can write a lot of scripts in isolation, whereas Discovery and Picard, you kind of got to nail 10 scripts at a time for a season. And when you go back to Deep Space Nine and those long arcs, the writers would talk about how hard that was to nail the continuity of all that. And it's no easier these days. We're just more used to that kind of work.
Yeah, I think if I remember correctly, J. Michael Straczynski kind of wrote most of Babylon 5 on his own. So you'd have Neil Gaiman wrote 1 episode here and there, but I think essentially Straczynski wrote it, which then enables you to You know what I mean? Because now you know the flow, you know the story, you know the beats, all of this. But in
Yeah.
a writer's room, we have
Yeah,
all of
on DS9, Deep Space Nine was a writer's room space, so you had the last 9 episodes, all one big continuity here, and it was a bunch of different writers. They all worked together. They all wrote the stories together, but then they'd go off and work on their scripts on their own because they had to pump out 25 episodes a year, and they
yeah.
were under an enormous time crunch. So if somebody on episode of the last 9 episodes, if somebody changed something in episode 3, they might have to go back to episode one or two and fix those scripts up. So everything could have
Mm,
ripple effects everywhere. I mean, of course, that's the same in modern series TV today, but it is hard, regardless of what you're doing. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's my personal opinion that that especially Discovery, but also Picard to a degree, struggled with that. I think for some people, the shows probably worked really well. They worked okay for me. So I wonder what was there something in their process that didn't give them quite as enough time to really work those scripts a little bit more, or were they happy with where they got to? I don't know.
mm. Yeah, it's always it's an it's an interesting thing I find sometimes. Just yeah, as you said, you sometimes watch something you think it feels a little rushed or like that doesn't feel as developed as that thing, and then you listen to interviews and like, oh yeah, it was a struggle, we were pushed, we were, and it does kind of, yeah, you can see it, right? So that makes it really interesting. But then other times there you don't hear any of that, so it's just like, yeah, I wonder what it
Mhm.
was. But as you said, look, sometimes these things don't work for you, but they work for other people, you
Yeah,
know?
and
So,
even in U Run, we have examples of that. I mean, we had to. There's two major sequences that we changed. One after we shot most of it, and the other shortly before we shot. At the end, so the two race scenes, the 10K and the marathon. Trent was scripted to be through the entire 10K scene, but when we filmed it, the actor wasn't available, and we rewrote it to have
uh,
him absent. Which, when I watch it, it works and it resonates a
mm,
lot better. It gives her moments where she's alone. The marathon was originally scripted to be in a big marathon, like with a bunch of people. And ultimately, we realized we couldn't afford it to set one up on our own with all the people that we'd want. But and it wouldn't work with our schedules to try to shoot within an existing event. S and then ultimately we realized it is so much more of an extreme experience to do a marathon on your own versus with a group.
mm,
So both of those things, through that adversity, I think made it a more interesting, better film. And so sometimes those restrictions help you, and sometimes they don't at all. There is one scene, one shot in U Run that we filmed at the end of COVID. We didn't have access to fill up through most of COVID for one pickup shot for him. And there is one shot that we filmed like a year and a half later from everything else. And we didn't know if we could get that scene or not. At one point, I was trying to figure out can I learn how to deep fake to do a face replacement on a body double for that shot, and I learned how to.
oh damn, okay.
We weren't sure if we could get Philip for all the ADR we needed, including that scene. And we were talking with Reese Beecher, the folks in Ukraine who are now known for doing Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader's voice in Kenobi and in Mandalorian. And
uh,
before, so they had been working on these shows, but they couldn't quite tell us about it all yet,
yeah.
and found okay, that's an option. Ultimately, we didn't need any of it because we were able to finally connect with Philip when he was between shows. He had just finished shooting First Kill, which finally went up on Netflix last week. Shot up to number 2, a teen vampire slaying show. It looks like a
Mm,
lot of fun. I'm excited to watch that. And so yeah, we had a ton of problems behind the scenes trying to finish this movie during COVID. But one hopes you can't tell at the end, but yeah, some of those problems were in the script, some of the problems were in the production.
I mean, that is like the interesting thing about that is, yeah, I do think it works with him not being there in a 10K,
Yeah.
right? But what is kind of now I'm thinking like, so what would happen if he was available, right? And you could have shot him in. So do you shoot it, look at it and go, yes? Or do you shoot it and go, actually, let's remove, like, what would have happened? You know what I mean? Because
So
it's great the way it is.
yeah, when I look at a movie like Michael Bay's Transformers movies, I see somebody who has no restrictions. He can do whatever he wants. And that's not always the best thing. Sometimes restrictions and compromises create challenge where creativity can emerge, and you're forced to really see what's actually important here, what's the core of this, and get rid of everything else. I think that's why a lot of often lower mid-budget movies can be so amazing, because they force you to focus on the core of what's absolutely essential, if you're thinking that way. Um, so I just lost my train of thought. What was I going to say? Yeah. So, but then on the other side, you have movies like the Marvel MCU films, who have a process of iteration. They're able to build their movie, and then they have a bunch of budget aside for pickups. They can see the film, they can see what's working, what's not working, and then very surgically, very strategically enhance sections, and not just with VFX, but with new shots, new photography. That's all planned for. They know the best way to make a great movie is to get a really good rough draft and then polish it, not the traditional way of shoot everything, hope for the best, and never plan to go back and grab anything else. So I think a lot of their quality comes from constant iteration, constant evaluation, constant checking of assumptions, and I think there is an idea out in the metasphere right now that if somebody does pick up shots, they're called reshoots and they're called a mistake. They screwed up the movie. They got to fix it.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
I think that's a really harmful idea, because nobody would say, we did a first draft of a script, we screwed it up, now we got to rewrite it. No, of course you don't say that. And if you have the opportunity to continue polishing and iterating on your film in pickups the way Marvel does, I think that's a wonderful opportunity. Video games are built that way. You get something roughed in, and then you polish and polish and polish and polish. When you look at and Force Awakens, I listened to the Star Wars director's commentary of that. A lot of the close-ups in that movie are pickups. So there's a lot of scenes with Rey and Finn. They shot everything on location. They roughed it in. They found the general beats of the scenes, but in the editing, they realized now that we got to the end of the shoot, we have found the chemistry between these characters. So let's pick up strategic close-ups to reinforce the chemistry of the characters. And I love that chemistry. So a lot of that they found through iteration over time. Same thing with Han and Leia. All the scenes with Han and Leia, most of the wide shots are from early in the shoot. Most of the close-ups are from pickups near the end of the shoot, because they were able to see what really worked and refine that based on what they learned throughout the whole shoot and through editing. And I think that's a great way to do that if you can afford it. Obviously, Disney has the cap for it. Most movies don't.
Yes.
But if you can, it's a wonderful way to iterate until you have it great. That doesn't mean be sloppy with your script. It doesn't mean start shooting your movie before you have a script ready, because that happens too, and then you're in big trouble. But I think the idea that pickups or doing more shoots after the main shoot means there's a problem is it is a harmful idea. I think if you do it well, it's an amazing opportunity to continue iterating.
You are very correct though with that, because it was always, you'd always hear it reported. You'd look at a site like Dark Horizon or something like that, and it'd be like problems on set. You know, like, oh, they've had to go back and reshoot this, and yeah, there's rumblings that this has happened, and it's always been looked at that yeah, it's problematic. But then you listen to people like Kevin, I always say Feige, but I don't know if it's
Kevin Feige.
Feige. Okay,
Feige.
um,
Yeah.
Feige. I'm probably my pronunciation is dreadful, but yeah, you listen to him talk and the way that breaks it down and explains it. Yeah, it's as you just said, it makes sense. It's just like no, it we're just fine tuning these parts and we plan for that. And
Mhm.
when you hear it, you'd be like, yeah, that makes perfect sense. Why wouldn't you? But yeah, it's this weird thing where we want to look at things sometimes and be like, oh, there must be an issue. There's definitely a problem with that, which is insane. Mm. Um, One thing I want to ask you, Ed, what like because as you said, look, you've done TV, right? You're doing these films, you've done video games, right? What for you is the kind of big difference between them all? You know what I mean? Because like it's all storytelling in some regard, right? So there's must be these transferable skills that you take across all of them. But are there any like key things that are like very unique just to that format?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So let's just talk about interactive fiction versus non-interactive fiction. So movies, everything you're doing to make a movie is at the service of the story. People go to a film, go to a TV show for story, to be swept away, engaged with characters, to lose themselves in that world and the characters. When you're making games, when you're making interactive fiction, the interaction, the you as a character, you as a player having agency in the world is what you go there for. The story is at the service of the interactive. So when I'm a writer on a game, when I'm a narrative director on the game, everything I'm doing is at the service of the game. So the story will change and modify and alter as needed based on the kind of experience we're trying to give the player interactively. Whereas in movies and TV, everything you're doing is at the service of the story. Whereas in games, the story is at the service of something else. Now, there are
Mm.
games that are very story focused, very story driven, and sometimes those scales do tip. You're creating a game that evokes an experience or a mindset. There's some wonderful indie games that get you in the mind of get you in kind of the evoking certain experiences of of things um, that that are very hard to describe in any other way. But generally, yeah, generally it's story. Games are very rarely at the service of story, and it's vice versa. That's what I would
Uh,
say is the core for me. That's the absolute core fundamental difference between the two. Now, and then the craft of how you tell that story in the different mediums is so dependent on the kind of game that you're making. Every kind of video game, every genre has different ways of telling stories, different entry points. How do you relate to the protagonist? How does the protagonist relate to the world? Does the protagonist change like they do in a movie, or is the protagonist the agent of change to the world? Um, where you don't really change. The Mass Effect series, for example, Commander Shepard didn't really change, but his actions changed the world. Whereas a movie about Mass Effect, if they would have Commander Shepard, which I feel would be a mistake because there is no one Commander Shepard, that movie might have that character changing. And I think I haven't seen the Halo TV show, but I'm wondering if they gave the Master Chief character a character arc. Because in the games, Master Chief, the character never changed. The
mm.
world changed through their actions.
Yeah, I heard that they're removing the helmet. I mean, that's I believe I read that somewhere that was one big thing that's going to be different. They're going to have the helmet come off, and you'll see the face. But yeah, I don't know because Paramount. I think it just hit on Monday over here. or maybe it was at the weekend. But yeah, it's only just kind of come, and I'm like, oh, I might check it out, but I think I'm gonna wait for all of Halo to come out, and then I'll do a little trial, and yeah, probably end up with another friggin' streaming
It's been
platform.
out here for a little while, but it hasn't quite risen up on my list. There's way too much to watch.
I know, right? I haven't done Kenobi yet. I
I
was
love
gonna
it.
start it the other day, and then I was just like, but I've got these films I need to do. And,
I absolutely loved Kenobi. It was wonderful. So I hope you.
okay, okay, that's it. Yeah, because I've enjoyed everything else. I finished Moonlight recently. And I really enjoyed Moonlight. Really enjoyed Moonlight. I like the fact that they kind of steeped it in Egyptian mythology, and it wasn't what you see. You know what I mean? Like stuff like Wonder Woman, that is kind of embedded in kind of Greek mythos, but no one really looks Greek. You know what I mean? And like all the other stuff around it. But with Moon Knight, everyone does kind of, you have a lot of Egyptian actors and actresses involved, the music, the aesthetics, you just have that feel to it. And I really loved that because it made it different to Hawkeye or, Cap and Winter Soldier and these other things that we've seen.
I
So
loved
yeah.
how I loved how that one started. The first couple episodes with the multiple personalities was really intriguing. What I found once they moved to Egypt is I was less interested in the character. I wasn't as connected with the Moon Knight character nearly as much, um, and it
Mm,
felt more, in some ways, like traditional Marvel, big like big historical mysteries and gods fighting amongst themselves, rather than the interesting psychological mystery in the first couple episodes. But I
yeah.
did love what you're talking about, having like Egyptian music, Egyptian performers, elements of those cultures. Although there is far more to Egyptian cultures than just pyramids, and
Oh
which is
yeah.
what I love. Which is what I love about Miss Marvel. I've seen a few episodes now. That it's, yeah, there's some superpowers, but it's shown me a Pakistani American family and that culture in a certain time and age of a character that I've never really seen on TV before. And it's shown me new, interesting cultural aspects, regardless of it being a superhero show or not. That's interesting. And
Mm,
I found the Moon Knight story in some ways the cliche, what felt like a cliche Western idea of Egypt rather than uh, a modern, authentic Egypt. I
right,
assume
right.
that's, yeah, I don't know how correct that assumption is, but the last episode with a bunch of Egyptian giant gods punching each other felt more classic Marvel than most of the Marvel TV shows had at that, until that point. So I didn't
Yeah,
love it at all.
yeah, I will definitely, I do agree with that the beginning is more interesting with that kind of character breakdown, right?
Mhm.
That kind of look at it. And yeah, it does then become, big people fighting and all of that. I was very intrigued at the last episode at the very end, when, because if Moon Knight, it's multiple personalities, but we don't see multiple personalities. And then there's that little thing at the end, and you're like,
I don't know Moon Knight at all outside of the TV show.
right, right, okay. I am looking forward to Miss Marvel though, because I read the early comic book series by G. Willow Wilson, and as you said, it's this really nice look at this Pakistani family, right?
Mhm.
And you get the superhero element, but it's not, that's not the be all end all of it.
Mhm.
It's this girl trying to find a way, like, does she like this boy, what's happening with her friend group, and that's very compelling. So
Yeah, it's all
I'm
really
really
well done.
to
It's
see how.
translated into the show beautifully from what I understand of it.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So I really should get going back to work.
Yes. Yeah, but I really appreciate. Firstly, I appreciate the fact that you bared with me all this time, Ed. So apologies for that. Hey, really appreciate this time. Really interesting conversation, and I hope we can continue it when your next projects drop.
I'd love to.
Okay, let people know where they can keep track of what you're doing, right?
So you can find me on various platforms. Edward J. Douglas on Instagram, on Twitter, and on Vimeo. So you can see my work up on Vimeo there. And Kevin, will you be able to connect some links to a You Run trailer into Swiped as well?
Oh yeah, all the links, everything like that. You can keep track, you can follow, you can watch. Just go to the episode information, people, and definitely keep track of Ed, because man, he's creating some really interesting stuff.
Thank you. That's very kind of you to say, Kevin.
Hey, no worries. Thank you again for your time, and yeah, I look forward to what you do next.
All right. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right, man. Take it easy.